Well, good afternoon, good evening, or good morning, depending on where you are in this world. Welcome to today's DevOps.com webinar. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon. I'm the managing editor at DevOps.com, and I'm the moderator for today's event. We've got a really interesting webinar on tap for you today, but before we get started, we do have a few housekeeping items. First of all, today's webinar is being recorded, so if you miss any or all of today's presentation, you will be receiving a link in an email after the event that will allow you to listen or watch the webinar on demand. Excuse me. We also will have a polling question during today's event, so pay attention. We'll be asking for your opinion on something and share the results of that as well. Also, we are taking audience questions, so at any time during the event, if you have a question for our presenter, please use the control panel. You can submit your question that way, and we'll take probably about 15 minutes or so before the end of the event to go over those audience questions. Okay, with that, I would like to go ahead and kick off today's webinar, which is Calendars for Humans, How to Undo the All-Day Cram. Our speaker today is Dominica DeGrandis, who is the, Director of Digital Transformation, I believe, at Tusk. Welcome, Dominica. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks, Charlene. Happy to be here.
Great. Well, I'm going to go ahead and take my my webcam offline so you guys don't have to watch me listen to Dominica, and I'll just turn things over to you.
Okay. Thanks so much. So hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us. As Charlene said, I'm Director of Digital Transformation at Tusk. So what that means is I help teams make their work visible, so that it can see the bottlenecks, and then I work with organizations to optimize their entire workflow end-to-end. So I'm involved in DevOps transformations and lean transformations and agile transformations. And when I work with people, I ask them what prevents you from getting your work done. And these are the results that I typically hear. These are just sort of like typical responses with team pain points. Too many interruptions, people can't focus on what they want to do, conflicting priorities, and too many meetings, just too many different tools. We don't have time to do our internal process improvements, and lots of reorgs, and every reorg brings a new tool, a new process method. So in this talk today, though, I'm going to take on the too many meetings. I'm going to address the too many meetings complaint, provide you with some ways to optimize your time, and then talk about how to influence people around you, how to influence the boss to try and make some changes here. There are 5 thieves of time that, if we could see and measure the impact of, could help us improve our performance. So I'm going to introduce them to you real briefly. Thief on the left in the yellow there is thief unplanned work. This is, when the database schema changes unexpectedly, and now you have to go change your code because of this database change. This is queued up usually with the word can't, can't log into the test environment. You get that your chat or your Slack comes in, hey, we can't find the NFS mounts, we can't get the build to compile. Thief unplanned work is the foundation of interruptions. Next up in blue is conflicting priorities. Conflicting priorities usually starts with a question, well, are we supposed to work on project A or project B? And when the answer is, which it often is both, then that's a problem. Everything can't be the top priority. In the middle there is sort of the big bad boy dependency thief, right? Unknown or invisible dependencies, right? And this usually starts with, oh, by the way, right? Oh, by the way, the database schema changed. Or, oh, by the way, Brent isn't here to figure out this DNS issue. Brent is the person who is in the middle of everything, and it seems like you cannot ever do a release without Brent. Next up in green is thief neglected work. This is the work that sits on the sidelines and it doesn't get the budget or the resources or the attention it needs to get done, and it just is still there. It just hangs around. forever. We like to call those zombie projects. And then the ringleader thief on the right in pink there is thief too much WIP. And this is all the partially completed work on your plate that is just overwhelming, and it just gridlocks our deliverables. And I believe that if we can expose these thieves and acknowledge their existence and make them visible, then we can sort of chase them away and begin to take back our day. So we actually did a survey asking people which time thief, well, it's a poll really, Twitter poll, which time thief prevents you from getting your work done. In Twitter, there's a max of 4 answers, so we just did these 4, and thief neglected work got left out like it usually does. And 40% out of 45 votes. The poll was only 24 hours, and it really kicked in at about hour number 23. We should have left it up probably for another day. But this was the result. So by far, 40% of folks are saying too much WIP is what prevents them from getting work done. So let's look at too much WIP for a little bit and define what that is. Too much WIP, it's all the work on your board, all the work on your Post-its around your computer, all the work in your ticketing system, all the unplanned work that interrupts your day. It's when the demand exceeds your capacity. Too much WIP comes from too much yes. And that's why people tend to not get started on their to-do list until 6 p.m. because you come in the morning, you've got your to-do list, and then all the interruptions. People drive by your cube or your office or ping you on Slack and say, do you have 5 minutes? But nothing ever takes 5 minutes. And when the day continues like that, it's not unusual for you to not be able to start your to-do list until later on in the afternoon. So then the question becomes, why do we take on more capacity? Right? Why do we take on more work than we have capacity to do? A problem for, just a question here, put your Sherlock Holmes hat on, why do we say yes? The problem for a spouse who can build or fix just about anything is that the other spouse gives them a long list of things to do. And it's hard for them to say no because they like the people that ask them. And the same is true at the office, right? We do things for people we like. But there's at least 5 other reasons why people say yes when they get asked to do something, even if they don't have time. And so first one is nobody wants to be responsible for letting the team down. We continue to say yes because we believe that we're going to help the team look smart and capable and win. We love to pull one on for the team. Next is what I call shiny new object syndrome. And this is just starting something new and exciting, and it's really more enjoyable than doing the grunt work of finishing something older and unglamorous. Much funner to implement some new microservices using Docker containers than maybe working on a security audit. I like to call this optimizing for fun. Next up is we just don't realize how big or how complex a request is. And everything always takes longer than we think it will, like always, especially other people's work. And I thought I could write a book in 6 months, but it took me about 16 months, if not a little bit longer, because we're just unaware of what we don't know. We have unknown unknowns that we don't realize until we dive into the work. Next up is it's super easy to say yes than no, especially to the boss. I get this feedback from people. They're worried about being let go. It's competitive out there, and they just don't feel comfortable saying no to the boss for a variety of reasons. And I'm not blaming the boss here because they're just trying to get. They're like everybody else. They got a bunch of stuff on their plate. They're trying to get stuff done, and they don't realize how long it's going to take. But, you know, when we ask people to take on more work than they have capacity to do, we just don't overload ourselves. We overload our teams. And so for the leaders out there, I want to suggest that you please consider your positional power when you ask people to do stuff, because they will say yes. And then lastly, people pleasers. Lots of people pleasers out there, even grouchy people like to say yes. It tends to be human nature. We get endorphins when we say yes. But the more yes, the more whip. So Charlene, let's bring up this poll to see what the audience thinks. Why?
Oh. All right, let's see.
Yeah, why do you take on more work than you have capacity to do?
Yeah, here we go. Here's the quick poll. Yeah, why do you take on more work than you have capacity to do? So there's 5 choices here. I don't want to let the team down. An exciting new opportunity came up. Didn't realize how big or complex the request was. The boss asked me, or I'm a people pleaser. So go ahead and get your answers in, and then we'll take a few seconds and go over the results. We're at about 55% of folks voting, so we'll give it just a few more seconds here. And all right. Awesome. All right, we're going to go ahead and close it out now and share the results here. We've got, looks like the boss asked me.
Yeah.
Figured that would be the one.
I got to take a screenshot of that. Yeah. Yeah, the boss asked me, and I don't want to let the team down.
Yeah. So do these kind of line up with what you've heard from other folks?
Yeah, I've heard some people point at the boss asked me and say that's the real reason there. And so with that, sometimes what we'll do then is we'll add a horizontal swim lane to people's boards for requests that come from leadership, just so we can see the impact of those. Because a lot of times those can be hidden; they're invisible, and when they're invisible.
Yeah, and they do pile up quickly. But you know what I'm also seeing here, I find really fascinating is the second highest, which is I don't want to let the team down. That's really indicative, I think, a lot of the culture in an organization. You know, how well do you want to work? You know, how well do you want to be perceived among your team members? I think that's really interesting.
It's human nature. We're tribal people. Yeah. Okay.
I'm going to go ahead and hide these results and let you get back to it.
Okay, thanks. And so if we go back to the Twitter poll, the Twitter survey, I chose conflicting priorities. That was what I selected, which early on had 50% of the vote up until Damon Edwards, he's like a DevOps luminary, replied that he voted for too much WIP and said, you know, his first impulse was conflicting priorities, but, you know, because the brain is wired to blame others. And yeah, sometimes there's burnout cultures that play a role, but often we do this to ourselves. Right? In my case, you know, life is full of interesting things to do, and most of them end up being rather rewarding. And so I have a hard time saying no because of that. It's just hard to say no to all the things. We think we can get stuff done faster, so we start more things, but the things always take longer, always, and it results in competing requests, and this is a major culprit of too much WIP, too much work in progress. When you hear my project is more important than that other project, you know thief conflicting priorities is stalking you. Because the priorities are unclear, and that's this thief's particular game plan, and it works really well. Let's confuse people on what the priorities are, so we say yes to everything. Because if all we have out there is priority 1s, 2s, 3s, and you have a whole pile of priority 1s, well, which priority 1 is the highest priority? You know, it impacts flow. So flow is the smooth and fast delivery of business value, you know, end to end across the whole value stream. And when we have competing priorities, we we've got competition for a lot of people's time and resources, and it blocks flow. There can be many important things to do, but there can only be one highest priority. So if these conflicting priorities is a problem for your team, now here's an exercise for you. Basically, it prompts discussions for what your explicit prioritization policy might look like. This is so people know what to work on and why. So, have this discussion. What is your prioritization policy? How do you visualize it? How do people know which work to pull next? What's the signal that work has been prioritized and it's ready to be worked on? And then how do you visually distinguish between high and higher and the highest priority so people are really clear and what's your commitment? So I'm going to show you a picture of that on a board. But I do want to make a comment that while prioritization is necessary, it's still insufficient. Like, we still need to find the bottleneck. We need to find the constraints in the system. And this is where making work visible comes into play. And so here's a board I designed. There's lots of different ways to make work visible. This is just one example. But when you have a zillion things, incoming things in the background, in the backlog, what's going on here is that instead of rank stacking the whole backlog, another option is just to say, what are the top 3 or 5 things that we need to get done next, that we need to finish next? And so we pull those into what we call a top 5 column there. There's 3 kinds of work on this board, green, blue, and yellow. So blue is revenue generation work. These are the business requests. These are the new feature requests that are coming in from product owners. The green items, are revenue protection work. So this is a lot of work that Ops is doing. This is your maintenance work, you're keeping the lights on, your security patches and whatnot. And the yellow items are unplanned work. And notice that yellow items only show up on the board towards the end because they're unplanned, they're unknown, so you can't plan for them. They're not in that front half of the board there. They don't come into play until you start working on them. So on this board, we've got a money bag icon, little money bag signal, and that it's a visual indicator that this item here, this yellow unplanned work item, is the highest priority on the board, and that's what needs to get delivered first. So it helps people swarm and understand and work on this one important thing, and it brings visibility to everybody else. So if they're not on this team, they can look at this board and understand what's the highest priority that this team is working on. The line of commitment there, that's where people want to bring visibility to work that has been prioritized, has been approved, there's funding for it, it's budgeted, it's ready to go, and once it crosses that line of commitment, then the team is full-blown working on it. And it's a nice line to have a time metric there. Ideally, we want to get both of these metrics. We want to get flow time end-to-end from when the customer first requested it, and then we want to understand how long it takes for the team to do this work. We call that sometimes, that's called cycle time. The constraint in this system is the WIP limit, the work in progress limit here, which is 8 plus 2. Well, it's 8 of whatever colors. It's 10 total, but you have to have 2 greens on the board. Because one of the biggest complaints we had when I asked people what prevents them from getting work done, or one of the problems is there's no time to do internal team improvements. And so we put that under revenue protection work. And this capacity allows the team to work on 2 of those kinds of items at any time. So If work is untouched within X number of days, this depends on the team, they decide, but say work is untouched for more than 10 days, then those items fall below the other heavy line there into the waiting area. There's a horizontal swim lane called waiting, and there's 2 items down there. That's signaling to everybody that those 2 items aren't getting the attention that they need. They're not getting touched at all. They're going to show up on an aging report. If you're capturing work like this, then that work will show up on an aging report, which can be really useful. And it becomes an undeniable source of exposing lower priorities. So use this kind of visual to provoke some conversations. Here's another example. When you track work like this, you can see the competing priorities. You can show why a security vulnerability improvement got done a week later because people were working on some other work. Conflicting priorities come to a head in the calendar. Calendars only have so much room in them, yet they're double booked and triple booked, or in the case of Paula Thrasher, they're quintuplet booked. Paula Thrasher is Director of Digital Services, so of CSRA. They provide services to the federal government. So this is national security, Department of Defense, Homeland Security, Army, Air Force, intelligence, etc. And they have this 12-week internal training program that levels up dev and ops skills to try and enable high-performing DevOps implementations. And this last training, one of the teams created this meme, which Paula sent me. And she said the aha moment for them, like the root cause of their calendar schedule problem, was that they were on multiple teams and projects at the same time. So they're having way too much WIP, and as a result, they were becoming the bottlenecks to everybody else's project. Nothing lives in isolation in the enterprise. You always need someone else, and they've got somebody else on another team. They've got their own backlog. They've got their own priorities, their own tools, and their priority one isn't your priority one. And so this is the conflicting priorities, lurking in calendars. I see 3 kinds of calendars a lot. I call these the 30-minute jam, the all-day cram, and the triple booked wham. Let's just go over these pretty quickly. The 30-minute jam, this is, well, if you're a manager and you manage lots of people, then you may have a lot of one-on-ones, a lot of 30-minute one-on-ones on your calendar. So it could look like this. Or if you're supporting multiple projects or other teams, if you're a shared services team, maybe you're attending a bunch of different agile stand-ups during the day. The problem with the 30-minute jam is the amount of context switching that occurs. It's like rush hour traffic. If you have 8, 9, 10 meetings a day on your calendar, it's constant stop and go. Just when you get up to speed, you gotta stop, jump into another meeting. It's like you barely have enough time to go to the bathroom, let alone think. Next calendar type is the all-day cram. And this calendar has no white space in it. It's just all day long. Every minute is booked. And the problem with this calendar is there's 0 room for variability. And what I mean by that is unexpected work, unplanned work, requests, and the urgent work that arrives. That means people have to cancel a meeting, which can be disappointed if, if I'm in a meeting and I prepared some material and did some research and I'm expecting some feedback and for people to make some decisions and then they don't show up or it gets canceled, I'm disappointed. Some people will say, well, no, I'm really delighted when a meeting gets canceled so I can get time back. And yeah, that's true. I see that too. But it depends, right? Sometimes it could be quite disappointing if you had a meeting with leadership and then they don't show. So how often are meetings canceled? That'd be a very interesting data point. How much time is wasted rescheduling meetings? How much more work could teams do if they didn't have to move meetings? So the third calendar, triple booked wham. We cannot be in 3 places at one time. So what happens? Either you don't show up or you do one of these, carry on without me. or the meeting gets canceled. And these have a cost in rework. So if a meeting is to review something for feedback or make decisions, the person who did that research just spent hours creating that presentation. If say the meeting's on a Thursday, the meeting gets canceled, they're going to move on to other work, right? And then they're going to have to come back to it. They're going to have to re-prepare, reschedule the meeting. And the context switching to pick up this old thing again is problematic. You got to get new data. You got to wrap your head around it. Knowledge work is perishable. So the longer the time span between doing the work and getting the feedback and the decisions that are needed in order to finish the work, the more people forget and the longer it takes to retrieve that info and get back up to speed on it. So it's going to increase your flow time. So what is the cost of that delay? What is the cost of that delay to your business? And that's why I have that cost of delay image in the bottom right-hand corner, because this is you can capture this information. You can show if things are delayed by 1 week or up to 6 weeks or however long you want, what the actual cost of that is, and that can help you influence people to make decisions. So let's look at some ways to optimize your calendar. Paul Graham, founder of Y Combinator, they fund early stage startups, came up with the idea of 2 types of schedule. He calls them the maker's schedule and the manager's schedule. And the manager's schedule is for decisions makers. Their calendar is parsed out into 1-hour increments, and they meet with other decision makers. The maker's schedule is for creative people, so developers, designers, writers, and these people prefer large chunks of time because you can't write or design something really well in an hour. Right? That's barely enough time to get started. You need a large chunk of time, and that's one reason why developers dislike meetings so much, because they're on a different schedule than other people. Each type of calendar serves its purpose, except when the two collide. And the meetings cost creative maker people more because of the interruption that it brings to them being in the zone. I'm also going to show a combo calendar. But what might an ideal maker calendar look like? Something like this with large chunks of time. It allows people to focus without interruption so they can get into the zone. Right? The zone it's that mental state when you're completely immersed and focused and energized in something. Like you can actually have some joy in the activity that you're doing. You're completely absorbed into what you're doing. You kind of lose sense of space and time. When I have 2 hours of uninterrupted time during lunch, I can get my D1 done. What's a D1? My D1 is the most important thing that I need to finish today, or I need to take it to the next level and get it to a good place before I'm interrupted. So if I'm writing a blog, I want this large chunk of time to work on it with 0 interruptions. And so ideally, when there are other meetings, because there's always meetings, ideally they're scheduled before or after a large chunk of time. If I'm really doing good, I can get a D2 done in the afternoon. And what it does to my happiness factor is fabulous. So having chunks of time on the calendar, ideally 2 hours. Why 2 hours? Because of ultradian rhythms. It's the body clock that allows people to focus really well before the brain wants a break. But how often do creative maker people get a calendar like this? When it's unusual that they don't have meetings scheduled haphazardly throughout the day. And if it's not, if they don't get their work done a day, then when do you get your work done? I think it's why really effective execs and managers are very careful when scheduling meetings with creator maker people. So let's look at a manager calendar. So one way for managers to give creative maker people uninterrupted time is to schedule all their one-on-ones, all their work with other decision makers so that the creative maker calendar can be pretty much free in the morning. They can have their large chunks in the morning. So this calendar, all the morning meetings are with other decision makers, although there is an ops review on Friday with the whole organization. I'll get back to that in a minute. The upper management is in a position to make everyone meet at their frequency. But if they know people need large chunks of time, then they can arrange the calendar to accommodate the prime maker time. I want to point out this unstructured time after department meetings, such as an all-hands or an ops review. It's one way that can reduce some interruptions. It's one way that leadership can make themselves available for questions without interrupting other people's time. Because not everybody feels comfortable asking a question in front of 300 people at an all-hands meeting. And so a block of an open time after an all-hands or an ops review gives people, it makes leaders approachable, and it gives people permission, if you will, to go up and ask questions and have time with leadership. What's up for debate here is what time of the day works best for the creative maker people. Now that's a hard one. What about different time zones? 1 p.m. in Boston is 10 a.m. in Seattle. So that's a decision that the organization needs to visit. I do have something on here called office hours, and what office hours are is a way, it allows people whose time you value to get an appointment with you. Office hours simulates the manager's schedule within the maker's calendar. So you can have office hours set up several times a week. It's a chunk of time set aside where people can actually schedule time with you. For Paul Graham, the chunks of time are at the end of the working day because the likelihood of the requester needing to head home or pick up children after work, it reduces an extended long meeting. But I've seen execs do this early in the morning too. Like if you want to meet with me, you need to get here before 7:30. Office hours is what I call an interruption buster. And I want to show you two other interruption busters via the combo calendar. So here's a combo calendar. As I mentioned before, conflicting priorities comes to a head in the calendar. So here's a typical calendar. There's some 30-minute jam going on. We got some maker stuff happening, and there's a little bit of triple booked WAM going on and with the pink and green there. So most of these meetings are randomly dispersed throughout the day from 8:30 to 4:30. And there's a few 30 to 60-minute slots, but they don't really allow you enough time to get your D1 done. But if you can make just a few adjustments to this calendar, you can put groups primarily in the morning. I mean, you'd have to reschedule your triple booked WAM because you can't be 3 places in one time. But you could, rearrange things to get some large chunks of time for your D1 in the afternoon. D1 is a form of DND, which stands for Do Not Disturb. Do Not Disturb is, well, let me bring it up. I'm gonna show you a slide of details on Do Not Disturb, but it's basically you have to socialize this with your team and let them know that I need a large chunk of time to do my creative work so I can have better performance, so I don't get interrupted. And when I have a cone on my desk or headphones on or a sign on my door that says, come back at 1:30, that's my Do Not Disturb time. Also on here is Pomodoros. Pomodoros is a type of tomato sauce that's typically served with pasta, but it's also my interruption buster number 1. So it's a time-saving technique introduced by Francesco Cirillo, he's the author of the Pomodoro Technique. I use my kitchen timer for Pomodoros, not my phone because my phone distracts me, but I just set my timer for, I set it for like 20 minutes because that's how much time I have left. And then I close everything and I'm just heads down, focused, usually for 30 minutes to get this thing done or get it to the next state that I want it to be at. It just provides this intense focus time. I use this method to finish my book. And then these are do not disturb hours. The most important thing about do not disturb hours is to set a regular cadence for them. So you train people when not to bother you. I worked for one organization. Every day they had their team meeting at before 1, and they said they'd be back at, they put a clock up on the door, back at 1, and they closed their door. So they trained people to know when they could come bother them, ask them questions. If you're going to have do not disturb hours, then you need to you have to let people know when they can come ask you questions. So by doing this, it allows us to protect our time. Like if we're going to get our most important work done, we need to ferociously protect our time. It gives us permission to say yes when you need to do your most, when you need to knock out your most critical issues, to say yes to yourself, and it gives you permission to say no to others because you're already full at that time. But when I suggest rearranging schedules and interruption busters, some people react with, well, that won't work here. We're a really heavy meeting culture. There's no way we're going to get people to change the way we work. We just can't say no. And so to that, I think when it comes to influencing others, metrics help because facts form the foundation of belief. Facts help people believe. And this allows us to use a bit of science to help people come to their own conclusion. This is an experiment you can try. You can form up a hypothesis, you can test it, there's some measurable evidence. If it's an experiment, then it's okay if it doesn't turn out exactly as planned. But this is actually an exercise that I have, and I'll give it to you at the end of this deck here. The idea here is that we want to measure one metric trend in 4 different areas: how fast, how productive, how good, and how predictable. Because it's fairly easy to game a metric, it's important to measure the impact of the change in one metric on the rest of your metrics by showing them all in one place. So that way teams can observe any negative impacts to metrics when one metric changes. So we're just going to look at 2 metrics here because of our time constraint. We're going to cover how fast and how predictable. But this is it. It's the balanced flowchart exercise. It's published by IT Revolution. They're the authors of the Phoenix Project and the DevOps Handbook and a lot of other really cool books. And we're using this. I actually use this exercise in workshops so that people can get visibility on the different kinds of work and they can learn more about good metrics that we're doing in DevOps and how to correctly measure them. So it's just pretty simple. There's a spreadsheet that's got data with flow time on it, and then there's a blank flow chart. The y-axis here is the number of days that it took to complete the work item, and the x-axis is the actual date that the work item was completed. So the arrow here is pointing to a business request, which is a form of revenue generating work that was completed. It took 14 days to do, and it was completed on the 18th of that month. It's this exercise is under Creative Commons. So when you get all of the flow times plotted on this chart, it looks like this. So this is the how fast chart. This is a speed chart. And we've got a legend on the right. We've got three kinds of work. So there's the revenue generation work, the revenue protection work with a circle with a dot in the middle, and then unplanned work is the triangle. flow time answers the question, how fast? How fast did it take to get this work done? All the dots here are done work. If you're sporting the all-day cram calendar and then you have 3 emergencies pop up in 1 week, that, the work that you plan to finish is going to be impacted. And if you're tracking that kind of work on a board, you're going to be able to see it in a chart like this. It's going to show up. If you're tracking unplanned work, you can make that visible, and it's going to show up in a chart like this. If you don't track unplanned work, then it's invisible. And if you got a lot of it, it's a problem because it's hard to manage unplanned work. So we can use this chart at personal level. You can use it at the team level, department level. If your tool chain is connected, you can get visibility on your end-to-end value stream flow time metrics. Then next, let's look at the predictability one. Like if you want to be more predictable with respect to how long things take, how your flow time, then the question becomes, what's the probability of finishing this work within so many days? And that's what a percentile can give you. This example here is showing the 90th percentile. It's saying, it tells you the value for which 90% of the data points, the items, the work items that were finished, took less to do. 9 times out of 10, the work here will be done in 20 days or less. Right? When you first start capturing metrics, you'll get this kind of triangular shape. Right? The first week you start capturing metrics, because it's your first week, things will only take a few days to do before you complete them. As the weeks go by, the work that took longer to do will start to appear. So this is just 1 month's worth of data. But once you start capturing 3 to 6 months worth of data, your randomness you won't have this triangular shape anymore. But so week 1, 90% of the work was done in 8.7 days or less. Week 2, 90% of the work was done in 9.8 days or less. Week 3, 90% of the work was done in 15 days or less. And week 4, 90% of the work was done in 20.7 days or less. So based on this data, when people ask you how long is something going to take, you can say with 90% confidence that revenue generation type of work will take between 8 and 20 days to complete. Maybe 90% is good enough for your organization. In my case, if we got 75% of our work done when the business expected it, that was fantastic. I mean, if you're making pacemakers, then bump it up to 100%, then bump it up to 25 days. But ask your stakeholders, are you good? We're 90% confident that we can get this kind of work done in so many days. Are you good with that? Or do you need it to be higher? Maybe you can bargain with them. If something really urgent comes through, if a silver bullet comes through and you have to get that done, we'll drop work to work on that. But most of the time, we'll get the work done, 90%. What's important here is the trend. It's the trend in time. What we're doing here is we're going from date-driven work to probabilistic view. And that is helpful so that, we can be, the idea is we're trying to be approximately right instead of exactly wrong. We're trying to use probability to set expectations instead of arbitrary due dates. Anyway, I jumped ahead there, but again, you can use this chart across your whole organization. If you're looking for a transformational change, or if you're already successfully capturing these metrics, then the next interesting challenge is how do you connect this across your whole value stream network? And that means connecting your tools so that the time metrics can be captured end to end. And this is what we do at TaskTop. We integrate 55 different tools from BA requirements tools to dev team agile planning tools to test tools to ticketing service tools. And when it comes to saying no, I thought, what if we just took Warren's message to heart here and ruthlessly protected our time by saying no, because the calendar will not organize itself. The onus is on you to do that. So I want to give you permission to say no. I made this sticker that I hand out during my talks, more no, less whip. It's been a pretty popular sticker. I think the time you invest in unclogging your calendar, if it's well done, is going to pay huge dividends in the future, for you and for your company. So I'm going to leave you with some stuff here. All you need to do is send me an email at dominica@sendyourslides.com. And I'll give you a copy of this presentation deck that we just did, and there's a link there that has the videos of most of my talks, most of my DevOps Enterprise Summit talks. There's also a 73-page excerpt of my book, Make Your Work Visible, and a 45-minute excerpt of the audiobook. There is an audiobook out, and the balance flowchart exercise in detail. There's a link there. You can print that out. And then there's a video. Well, it's an article with a video on Desktop's, task integration. So and the video shows how if you integrate ServiceNow and Micro Focus, HPE, ALM, and Visual Studio Team Services, if they're integrated, how you can maximize your performance. And so with that, I think we have time for a few questions.
Yeah, we do. We've gotten some great questions in so far, but there's time. If you do have a question for Dominica, please go ahead and use that control panel and submit your questions. Our first question is from William. He's got a really interesting observation. He said, I have an unscientific observation considering meeting productivity. In my opinion, the worst thing that has happened to productivity is allowing computers in meetings. The idea that multitasking is efficient is a total misconception. People are IMing others, playing Angry Birds or other work, just about anything but paying attention to the meeting. So how can a meeting be efficient when every question is repeating three times?
Well, my answer to that is that people, if they're not engaged, they're going to be on their laptop. I mean, unless somebody's taking notes or maybe they're carrying the duty pager, you don't have to have your laptop. But people bring their laptops in and get on them and do other things because the meeting is not engaging. If it's, Patrick Lencioni wrote this book, my bookcase called Death by Meeting, because they're boring. If all you're getting is a status out of a meeting, it's, you're just going around the table and people are saying what they're doing. It tends to be, I mean, they're not all boring, but if the work is made visible on a board and people can go to a board and see who's assigned to it and what the status is, then there's no need to do status updates in a meeting. Instead, you can use that meeting to identify where's the bottleneck and who's blocked and what we can do to unblock them. I think Patrick Lencioni's point about meetings is that in order to have a good meeting, you need to have some conflict in the meeting. I mean, people will sit through a 2-hour movie, no problem at all, because the movie is entertaining with conflict, basically. So this is where leadership needs to step in and provide a safe place for people to have engaging discussions on what is important to the people. One way to get around that is to do lean coffees. Lean coffees, if you haven't checked it out, just Google lean coffee. It's where the people who attend the meeting build the agenda and vote on their what they want to talk about, and then those get prioritized and they get run through a Kanban. And so people get to talk about what interests them, and the laptops come down. The laptop, comes down because people are engaged in talking about they're interested in. That's my answer to that.
Great. Okay. Next question, Eugene asks, given the trend on the 90% done time, why shouldn't we think the next week is going to show 25 days, then 30 days?
Oh, yeah. So what I showed was what you will typically see with when you're just starting to do metrics, and that's this kind of triangular, it's this triangular shape, but over, it takes a while to get a more stable pattern. Once you have to get at least 30 to 60 days of data in there for the dots not to have that triangular shape. There will always be outliers. But 90% is it's better than 50%. If you're just calculating the 50th percentile, which is the average, and that's pretty dangerous because then you're going to be wrong at least half the time. But move that percentile around. There's tools where you can move that percentile around to be at a comfortable level, and it's just a probability. It's a level of confidence where you can say, based on this data, here's how long it took us to do this kind of work, which is why it's important to have different kinds of work item types, because we have different kinds of work. Emergencies and expedites are going to be done in 1, 2, 3 days, right? So then you can set expectations on that. If you've got features overall, how of all your features you've done in the last 3 months, 90% of them were done in X amount of time. So you can start to have that conversation. It's really just trying to go from, we're trying to move away from a deterministic due date. Not everything has to have a due date. The World Soccer Cup's coming up in June. That's a real due date. We have to be done by then. But a lot of our work doesn't have to have a due date. People are okay, whether it comes in on a Monday or a Thursday. Most people are cool with that.
Okay, great. The next question is, I work in a services organization, so most of our work is actually unplanned. Is there a type of calendar that works best for this?
Yeah. If you're help desk or services, then basically all your work is unplanned. Or, the big majority of it is. And so, in that case, your calendar hopefully doesn't have other kinds of work on it, right? If that's the nature of your demand and you work on unplanned work all day long, then your calendar is, like your do not disturb hours are blocked for the periods of time that you're on call or that you are doing help desk or service desk requests. And when you need to attend meetings, you can't be in both places at one time. So if you're at meetings, all hands meeting or something, then that task of handling unplanned work is going to be carried out by somebody else. And there's always somebody on call, which is why usually in a meeting there is somebody, at least one person with a laptop to handle the expedites or emergencies.
Okay, great. We're about 7 minutes to the top of the hour. I think we have time for maybe 2 more questions.
Okay.
Next question. We have a big problem with meetings being canceled or rescheduled at our organization. Do you have any suggestions to address this across the organization? Is that kind of a cultural thing, or is it just maybe indicative of people just scheduling too much, or what do you think?
Yeah, I see it a lot. I had a few people respond to me on Twitter saying, over 50% of our meetings get rescheduled. And that's why I double book my time, because I know that the meeting's going to be rescheduled. I didn't quite know how to reply to that, because I see it as a symptom of a deeper problem. If if that many meetings are being rescheduled, the waste and the rework must be, I would think, would be pretty large. And if you can bring some visibility to what that delay is, then it can be associated with a cost, the cost of delay. Like the work items moving across the boards in the value stream, like that's money. That's business value that's delayed because things didn't get delivered because decisions and feedback was coming in late because of a rescheduled meeting. I think there's a huge cost to that. I think it's a problem, and I do think it's culture-based, and that in order to change that, it's going to be helpful to show some data on, show that this security compliance change was late because a meeting got rescheduled, or because I got pulled into some other meetings.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, great. Okay, so let's see, next question. Where can I find your book?
That's a good one. I like that one. Just Google on Amazon. Just bring it up on Amazon, Making Work Visible, author Dominica DeGrandis. And you can get paperback, you can get the audiobook, it's on Kindle, so, all the different formats are available on Amazon.
And tell us the title again.
It's called Making Work Visible, Exposing Time Theft to Optimize Work and Flow. So it's all about the 5 time thieves, and it's full of exercises. It's a really short book, and you can read it on a Saturday night or, Sunday afternoon. And it's just full of exercises that you can do with your organization to help them see the issues from unplanned work and conflicting priorities and unknown dependencies and neglected work, basically too much lit.
All right, great. Well, I think that's all the time that we have for the questions. I do want to thank the audience for participating, sending in your questions, and then also participating in today's poll question. As I stated at the top of the hour, today's event has been recorded, so if you missed any or all of today's event, you can access the webinar on demand. We'll be sending out a link and a follow-up email that will take you right to the webinar on demand. It's also going to be on the DevOps.com website, so you can always do a search there and find it. And while you're there, go ahead and check out all the other fabulous webinars that we have posted on the site and listed upcoming. And hopefully there'll be 1 or 2 at least that pique your interest.
I forgot to mention to put, if you send me an email at dominica@sendyourslides.com, be sure to put flow in the subject. Flow, F-L-O-W. That needs to be in the subject in order to get all the goodies.
From today. Okay, awesome. Yeah. All right, great. Well, Dominica, thank you so much for your time today. It was a very fascinating webinar, and I'm sure a lot of folks got a lot out of it. So thanks again for your time. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Charlene.
And thanks everybody also who attended today's event, and hopefully we'll see you again on another DevOps.com webinar.
Okay.
All right, take care everybody. Have a great day.
Bye-bye.